Indian Ocean Tsunami. What does it take to erase entire coastlines in minutes? On December 26, 2004, the answer came with brutal clarity. At 7:59 in the morning, the seabed off Sumatra ruptured along a fault line stretching over 800 miles. The magnitude 9.1 earthquake released energy equivalent to 23,000 atomic bombs. Within seconds, 30 cubic kilometers of water were displaced, birthing waves that would race across an ocean at 500 miles per hour. The communities along Indonesia's Aceh province had no concept of what was coming. Waves reaching 167 feet obliterated everything in their path, flooding 3 miles inland. The tsunami radiated outward in all directions, striking 14 countries across 2 continents. In some locations, beaches drained completely before the water returned as towering walls of destruction. 2 hours after the initial quake, India and Sri Lanka faced the same devastation. 7 hours later, the waves reached Somalia, still carrying enough force to kill. Over 227,000 people died that day. The Indian Ocean had no warning system in place. Families perished while the technology to save them sat unused thousands of miles away in the Pacific. The catastrophe forced a reckoning with complacency and exposed how preparation determines who survives and who doesn't. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Can human error turn midnight into the end of the world? At 1:23 in the morning on April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant answered that question. Engineers were conducting a routine safety test. They disabled critical safety systems to see if the reactor's turbine could power emergency cooling during a shutdown. What they created instead was a runaway chain reaction. The reactor's power surged to 100 times its normal capacity in seconds. 2 massive explosions followed, blowing the 1,000-ton reactor lid into the air and exposing the core. A graphite fire ignited, burning for 10 days and launching radioactive material miles into the atmosphere. The explosion released radiation equivalent to 400 Hiroshima bombs. 30 workers died within weeks. Another 100 suffered acute radiation syndrome. But the authorities remained silent. For 2 days, residents of nearby Pripyat went about their lives, unaware they were being irradiated. Only when Swedish sensors detected the fallout did the Soviet Union acknowledge the catastrophe. Over 350,000 people were evacuated from contaminated zones. The radioactive cloud drifted across Europe, contaminating millions of acres of farmland. An 18-mile exclusion zone was established, rendering entire communities permanently uninhabitable. The concrete sarcophagus built to contain the reactor remains, a tomb marking where hubris and negligence converged into history's worst nuclear disaster. Titan Submersible Implosion. 13,000 feet beneath the surface of the North Atlantic lies a graveyard that has claimed more than one vessel. On June 18, 2023, the submersible Titan began its descent toward the wreck of the RMS Titanic. 5 people were sealed inside the carbon fiber hull. The dive was scheduled to last 8 hours, offering paying passengers a glimpse of history for $250,000 each. 1 hour and 45 minutes into the descent, communication ceased. The final message from Titan reported dropping ballast weights, a routine adjustment as the craft approached the seafloor. 6 seconds later came the last automated ping, then silence. What investigators would later determine was that the pressure hull had failed catastrophically. At that depth, the surrounding water exerted nearly 5,000 pounds per square inch of force. The implosion occurred in milliseconds, faster than human neurons could register pain. A multi-day search operation mobilized across 2 nations before debris was located just 1,600 feet from Titanic's bow. The investigation exposed a pattern of ignored warnings, inadequate testing, and deliberate circumvention of safety protocols. OceanGate's CEO, who piloted the vessel and perished alongside his passengers, had dismissed concerns about the experimental carbon fiber design. The tragedy revealed that regulatory gaps and corporate overconfidence remain as dangerous now as they were when Titanic itself sank over a century earlier. Haiti Earthquake. How quickly can a nation's infrastructure collapse? For Haiti, the answer arrived in 35 seconds. The earthquake was not simply a natural occurrence. It was the convergence of geology and decades of systemic vulnerability. Port-au-Prince sat atop the Enriquillo Plantain Garden fault system, where the Caribbean and North American tectonic plates grind against each other. On January 12, 2010, at 4:53 in the afternoon, that fault released 2 centuries of accumulated pressure. The magnitude 7.0 quake struck just 16 miles from the capital. Buildings constructed without enforcement of safety codes disintegrated. The presidential palace crumbled. The National Cathedral collapsed. Government ministries, hospitals, and schools became tombs. Over 300,000 structures were destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. More than 220,000 people died within minutes, though exact counts remain debated. Another 300,000 suffered injuries ranging from fractures to amputations performed without anesthesia. 1.5 million residents found themselves without shelter overnight. Aid struggled to arrive as the airport's control tower sustained damage and the port became unusable. Bodies piled in streets faster than they could be buried. Mass graves became necessary. Within months, a cholera outbreak followed, adding thousands more to the count. The earthquake's economic impact equaled 120% of Haiti's entire gross domestic product, transforming an already impoverished nation into a humanitarian emergency of unprecedented scale. The Bhopal Gas Tragedy. What if silence could kill? On the night of December 2nd, 1984, the residents of Bhopal slept unaware that beneath them churned a catastrophe beyond comprehension. A Union Carbide pesticide plant held tanks filled with methyl isocyanate, a chemical so volatile that water alone could trigger disaster. Shortly before midnight, water entered tank 610. The reaction was instant. Over 40 tons of toxic gas erupted into the cool December air, drifting silently through densely packed neighborhoods. People woke gasping, their lungs searing, eyes burning as if set aflame. Families fled into streets thick with poison. Children were torn from their parents' grip in the chaos. Many ran blindly, each breath pulling more toxins deep into their bodies. Some collapsed mid-stride. Others vomited uncontrollably before dying where they fell. Pregnant women miscarried as they ran. By dawn, thousands lay dead in the streets. The final toll reached between 15 and 20,000 lives lost. Another 500,000 survivors bore permanent damage to their lungs, eyes, and nervous systems. No safety system had functioned. The plant had been poorly maintained, understaffed, and built with substandard equipment never deemed acceptable in wealthier nations. Union Carbide paid $470 million in settlement. The site remains contaminated 4 decades later, poisoning groundwater and birthing new generations of suffering. Mount Tambora. Eruption silence fell across the Indonesian archipelago in the minutes before 7 in the evening on April 10, 1815. Then Mount Tambora tore itself apart. The explosion registered a 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, releasing energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear weapons. A column of ash and gas rocketed 40 kilometers into the stratosphere, higher than any commercial aircraft has ever flown. The eruption could be heard over 2,600 kilometers away in Sumatra, where residents mistook the thunder for distant cannon fire. Pyroclastic flows raced down the volcano's slopes at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, incinerating forests and villages in seconds. 4-meter tsunamis crashed into neighboring coastlines. The mountain lost 1,400 meters of its height, leaving a caldera 6 kilometers wide. At least 10,000 islanders died immediately. Another 60,000 perished in the following weeks from starvation and disease. But Tambora's reach extended far beyond Indonesia. 150 cubic kilometers of material entered the atmosphere, blocking sunlight across the planet. Global temperatures dropped by 3 degrees Celsius. 1816 became known as the year without a summer. Snow fell in New England in June. Crops failed across Europe and North America, triggering widespread famine. Typhus and cholera epidemics swept through weakened populations. The eruption demonstrated how a single geological event could alter the entire planet's climate and reshape human history across continents. The Titanic Sinking. At 11:40 in the evening on April 14, 1912, Lookout Frederick Fleet rang the warning bell 3 times. An iceberg loomed directly ahead in the moonless darkness of the North Atlantic. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the engines reversed and the ship turned hard to port. But the RMS Titanic was traveling at 22 knots. The reaction came too late. The collision lasted less than 10 seconds. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side, buckling steel plates and opening 6 compartments to the sea. The designers had claimed the ship could survive flooding in 4 compartments. With 5 breached, mathematics became destiny. Water poured in at the rate of 7 tons per second. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, passengers and crew scrambled for the 20 lifeboats. There was space for only 1,178 people. Over 2,200 were on board. Many lifeboats launched half-empty due to chaos and inadequate evacuation procedures. Third-class passengers found gates locked between them and the boat deck, trapped by immigration regulations meant to prevent disease transmission at Ellis Island. At 2:20 in the morning, the ship broke apart and disappeared beneath the waves. Over 1,500 people perished in water colder than freezing. The Carpathia arrived 90 minutes later, rescuing 710 survivors from lifeboats. The disaster exposed how overconfidence and insufficient regulation had turned innovation into catastrophe. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill. On the night of April 20th, 2010, workers aboard the Deepwater Horizon felt the platform shudder beneath their feet. 5,000 feet below, in the darkness of the Gulf seabed, pressure had been building inside the Macondo well. The blowout preventer, designed as a final safeguard, failed. Gas and oil surged upward through the drilling pipe with unstoppable force. The explosion tore through the rig at 10 p.m., sending fireballs into the night sky visible for miles. 11 workers died in the blast or were lost to the flames. The platform burned for 2 days before collapsing into the Gulf. What remained was worse than the destruction above. The damaged well became an open wound in the ocean floor, hemorrhaging oil at 60,000 barrels each day. For 87 days, crude oil poured into marine waters, spreading across 11,000 square miles. Over 134 million gallons escaped before engineers finally sealed the well in July. Thousands of miles of coastline were smothered in thick crude. Birds coated in oil fell from the sky. Sea turtles and dolphins washed ashore lifeless. The dispersants used to break up surface oil created toxic plumes that drifted through deep waters, poisoning ecosystems invisible to those watching from shore. The cleanup cost exceeded $65 billion. The Gulf has still not fully recovered. Mina, Hajj, Stampede. September 24th, 2015 began like any Hajj morning in Mina. Millions had journeyed from across the globe, some saving their entire lives for this pilgrimage. Many were elderly, frail, desperate to fulfill their sacred obligation. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead as temperatures climbed past 45 degrees Celsius. At 9 in the morning, two massive crowds converged at the intersection of streets 204 and 223. Pilgrims pressed forward from opposite directions onto the same narrow passage. Those behind could not see what lay ahead. Those in front could not retreat. Within moments, the human river became a crushing wall. People stumbled and fell. Others piled on top, unable to stop their momentum. Wheelchairs crumpled like paper. Water bottles scattered uselessly across the pavement. The heat alone might have killed them, but trapped bodies could not breathe. Lungs compressed, ribs snapped, faces turned purple. Parents lost grip of their children's hands forever. By the time rescuers cleared the street, at least 2,431 people lay dead, though Saudi Arabia officially acknowledged only 769. Hospitals overflowed. DNA testing took weeks to identify the mangled remains. The survivors returned home haunted, their pilgrimage forever stained with the blood of the faithful. The Fukushima nuclear accident. Can a single wave erase decades of engineering confidence? On March 11, 2011, at precisely 2:46 in the afternoon, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off Japan's eastern coast. The tremor lasted nearly 3 minutes. Workers at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant followed emergency protocols, shutting down the 3 operating reactors. Everything appeared under control. Then the ocean rose. A 15-meter tsunami slammed into the facility an hour later, overwhelming defensive seawalls designed for much smaller waves. Water flooded the basement levels where emergency diesel generators sat waiting for precisely this kind of crisis. Every backup power system drowned. The reactors, still generating immense heat despite being shut down, suddenly had no cooling. Engineers watched helplessly as temperatures climbed beyond safe limits. Within 3 days, all 3 reactor cores had largely melted. Hydrogen gas built up inside the containment structures. On March 12th, Unit 1 exploded. Unit 3 followed 2 days later, then Unit 4. Radioactive materials poured into the atmosphere and groundwater. Over 150,000 people evacuated as contamination spread across Fukushima Prefecture. Though no deaths occurred directly from radiation, over 2,000 evacuees died from stress, interrupted medical care, and displacement trauma. The cleanup cost reached $180 billion. Contaminated zones remain restricted today. Banqiao Dam Failure. What happens when blind faith in engineering meets the fury of nature? In 1975, the answer came in the form of a catastrophe so immense that the Chinese government buried its details for decades. The Banqiao Dam stood 80 feet tall on the Ru River in Henan Province, a monument to ambition constructed in 1952. Soviet advisors had overseen its design, and engineers nicknamed it the Iron Dam, convinced it could withstand floods occurring once every 1,000 years. That confidence proved tragically misplaced. On August 5th, Typhoon Mina collided with a cold front and stalled over Henan. In just 24 hours, more rain fell than the region typically received in an entire year. Over 64 inches pounded the earth across 3 days. Communication lines went dead as workers frantically piled sandbags atop the dam. Just after midnight on August 8th, water breached the structure. A wall 30 feet high and 7 miles wide tore downstream at 30 miles per hour, obliterating villages in seconds. 61 other dams collapsed like dominoes. The official death toll stands at 26,000. Unofficial estimates reached 230,000 when accounting for disease and starvation that followed. Entire communities vanished. The disaster remained classified until 2005, its true scale hidden from the world, proving that sometimes the deadliest failures are the ones governments refuse to acknowledge. Gerik Bus Crash. When would you choose to come home? After a celebration with family, stomachs full from Eid al-Adha feasts, students from Sultan Idris Education University made a decision countless Malaysians make every year. Catch the late bus back to campus. Who truly believes their journey will be their last? On the 9th of June, 2025, 42 students boarded a privately chartered bus in Jerti, Terengganu. The east-west highway stretched before them, a 115-kilometer ribbon through the darkness connecting their hometowns to Tanjung Malim. Most had settled into sleep by 1 in the morning, trusting in the hands guiding them through the winding descent near Tasik Banding. Then, chaos erupted. The bus struck a Perodua Alza from behind. Metal shrieked against asphalt as the vehicle overturned, flinging passengers through shattered windows into roadside ditches. Bodies tumbled onto bodies. One survivor would later describe waking with a corpse atop him, forced to push the lifeless weight aside to breathe. 15 souls perished instantly. 33 others lay bleeding in the pre-dawn blackness, waiting for rescue teams navigating steep terrain without streetlights. Investigations revealed no mechanical failure. The brakes functioned. The tires met standards. Instead, fingers pointed toward human error. A driver with 18 prior summonses, most for speeding, and a bus company that had illegally sublet its permit. Malaysia mourned its deadliest accident since 2013, while survivors grappled with trauma no classroom could have prepared them for. Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. How many school children were watching? Across America, classrooms buzzed with anticipation on January 28, 1986. A teacher was going to space. Krista McAuliffe, smiling and waving, had become more than an astronaut. She represented possibility itself. 73 seconds. That was all it took for dreams to shatter into billowing smoke above Cape Canaveral. Commander Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, mission specialists Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, and Ellison Onizuka, payload specialists Gregory Jarvis and McAuliffe, climbing toward the heavens at 11:38 in the morning. Then, an explosion pierced the Florida sky. The shuttle disintegrated 14,000 meters above the Atlantic, scattering debris across the ocean while millions watched in paralyzed horror. What had gone wrong? Engineers from Morton Thiokol knew. They had fought desperately to stop the launch, warning that freezing overnight temperatures would compromise the rubber O-ring seals on the solid rocket boosters. One engineer would later testify through tears that he had fought like hell. His warnings were overridden. The cold rendered the seals brittle. Hot gases escaped, igniting the external fuel tank. The crew cabin detached intact, tumbling 2 minutes and 45 seconds before slamming into the ocean. Investigators believe they remained conscious during the fall, oxygen deficiency claiming them before impact. America mourned 7 pioneers. NASA grounded shuttles for over 2 years, redesigning systems while grappling with institutional failures that had prioritized schedule over safety. Bangladesh Cyclone. What could a nation do against winds that reached 200 kilometers per hour? On November 12, 1970, the people of East Pakistan's coastal lowlands faced nature at its most merciless. Farmers tending rice paddies, fishermen mending nets, families preparing evening meals on islands like Bola, Hatia, and Manpura, scattered across the Ganges Delta where rivers met the Bay of Bengal. Then the sea rose. A wall of water 10 meters high swept across the flatlands, driven by the cyclone's fury. Entire villages vanished within minutes. Homes dissolved into churning brown water. Children were torn from their parents' arms. The ocean swallowed fishing boats, crops, livestock, and over 300,000 souls, though some estimates reached 500,000. Bodies floated for weeks across the delta. Survivors clung to trees, watching neighbors drown. What turned catastrophe into revolution? The Pakistani government's response proved as devastating as the storm itself. While international relief flights arrived within days, aid from West Pakistan, where power resided, crawled forward too slowly. Supplies stalled. Politicians delayed. The contrast between foreign compassion and domestic indifference ignited fury across East Pakistan. 1 month later, elections delivered landslide victory to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's Awami League. When the military refused to transfer power, guerrilla fighters emerged disproportionately from the cyclone's most ravaged regions. By December 1971, Bangladesh had won independence through 9 months of warfare, sparked partly by a government that abandoned its people when the waters rose.